It's music's biggest night, but the 61st Grammy Awards will be missing some of the industry's biggest stars. Three of the hip-hop's top artists, Kendrick Lamar, Childish Gambino, and Drake, were all offered a chance to perform, but they all said no, according to a New York Times interview with Ken Ehrlich, the show's longtime producer. Now, CNN has reached out to those artists for comment on their decision, but we haven't heard back yet. Ehrlich did tell the paper, the fact of the matter is, we continue to have a problem in the hip-hop world when they don't take home the big prize. The regard of the Academy and what the Grammys represent continues to be less meaningful to the hip-hop community, which is sad. Now, in the past few years, the awards show has been hit with complaints of a lack of recognition for minority and female artists. Top hour, you are in the CNN newsroom. I'm Ana Cabrera in New York. Thank you for being here. We began this hour with the near breakdown of border security talks as the deadline for lawmakers not just to cut a deal, but to get it passed in both the House and the Senate looms at the end of this week. Remember, no deal will likely lead to a second partial government shutdown, less than a month after the longest one in U.S. history, which is expected to ultimately cost the U.S. economy $3 billion. That's money economists say we will never get back. Several sources are telling CNN the two sides were on track for a weekend agreement, but now they're stalled. And while negotiations have not completely fallen apart, negotiators cannot get past two sticking points, we are told: funding for a border barrier and the lesser-known cap on detention beds for undocumented immigrants detained within the U.S. A Republican aide tells us the number offered is just too low, a non-starter. But a Democratic aide says the lower number will force the administration to prioritize serious criminals in determining which immigrants to detain. Let's head to the White House and CNN's Boris Sanchez. Boris, unlike the first shutdown, which started before Christmas, the president has no intention of owning this one.
That's right, Anna. That may be one of the only differences this time around. Otherwise, we're effectively exactly where we were back in December with a potential shutdown looming, and President Trump contributing to the negotiations by attacking Democrats on Twitter. He tweeted about negotiations several times today, at one point inaccurately stating Democrats' position on that issue of capping the number of beds, and also suggesting that Democratic leadership was holding back the Democratic negotiators. He writes, quote, "I don't think the Dems on the border committee are being allowed by their leaders to make a deal. They're offering very little money for the desperately needed border wall, and now, out of the blue, want a cap on convicted felons to be held in detention." Again, Democrats are asking for a cap on funding for beds in ICE detention centers, not on the number of actual potential felons that are detained. We should point out the acting chief of staff, Mick Mulvaney, was asked on the Sunday morning talk shows about what the most likely outcome would be. He didn't really have a clear answer except to say that the possibilities are broad. We could see another potential government shutdown. We could see some executive action from the White House to try to get money for the president's long-promised border wall. Or we could potentially see a deal, though that seems increasingly unlikely. We should point out a Democratic aide told CNN that if talks do completely break down, House Democrats are prepared to present a bill in the House that would fund DHS through September and keep the government open. It's unclear, though, if the Republican-led Senate would then actually take that up. Also notable, the president has an event tomorrow in El Paso, Texas, where we will likely hear more of his rhetoric. Anna.
All right, Boris Sanchez at the White House. Thank you for the latest. And now to the race for the White House and the fast-growing field of Democratic candidates running for president. Today, another one, a U.S. senator, made it official. Amy Klobuchar, the senior senator from Minnesota, in wintry conditions that surprised nobody in Minneapolis in February, right? She told cheering supporters the nation is a fractured community, weary of shutdowns and grandstanding. She did not mention President Trump by name, however. Also on the campaign trail today, Democratic Senator Cory Booker, 9 days into his run for president. Today he's in South Carolina, and CNN's Rebecca Buck is there too in Columbia. Rebecca, as this Democratic field gets bigger, what is Cory Booker doing at this stage to try to set himself apart?
That's right, Anna. Well, it's a little warmer here in Columbia, South Carolina than it is in Minnesota today. Cory Booker's making his first visit since he announced his bid for president officially earlier this month. And he's been making the case here and in Iowa, where he was 2 days before this, traveling around also campaigning following his announcement. He's been making the case first that he's the only former mayor among the senators who are running for president. So he has a very unique set of experience, but he's also spreading a message of unity, of love, relentlessly optimistic. It sets him apart from some of the other Democrats like Elizabeth Warren, who we heard today, mentioned Donald Trump in her remarks and is taking him on directly. Booker, in his remarks, not even mentioning the president by name if he can avoid it. Today, he just referred to him as that person in the White House. So a bit of a different approach from him, also a different approach in terms of where he's going today in South Carolina. A few weeks ago, he was on the steps just behind me at the Capitol speaking for Martin Luther King Day. Today, he's focusing on rural areas of the state, going to small towns within striking distance of Columbia, South Carolina. Listen to his thinking on the places he's visiting this trip.
My first campaign stop as a candidate for presidency, I wanted to come to this community because my whole career is about going to the places that often people don't go to, don't talk about, don't face and confront.
So how do Booker's chances look in South Carolina? Well, Democrats believe he has a huge potential upside in the state, but there's also stiff competition. Senator Kamala Harris has been focusing aggressively on South Carolina, and Democrats here say if Joe Biden gets in the race, he also has a very strong network in this first in the South primary state. Anna.
Rebecca Buck in South Carolina, thank you. Let's talk more about the competition that is growing. Another Democratic candidate who made it official this weekend, Massachusetts Senator Elizabeth Warren. She's also working a key early voting state today, and CNN's MJ Lee is joining us in Iowa City, Iowa. MJ, Senator Warren no longer the newest candidate on the block. As of just a couple of hours ago, you just spoke to her. Tell us about it.
That's right. We actually started the day, Anna, in Cedar Rapids. And as soon as Elizabeth Warren took the stage, she went after Donald Trump by name. She said by the time that 2020 rolls around, President Trump may not be president anymore. And then she said he may not even be a free person. Obviously, sort of glibly talking about the fact that he may be in prison by the time that Election Day comes around. Now, this was notable because Elizabeth Warren, since she announced her exploratory campaign back on New Year's Eve, she has been pretty reticent to ever mention President Trump by name. And she explained that even though she did that this morning, we shouldn't expect to see that kind of language from her every single day, that she, in fact, wants to be emphatic about not engaging President Trump on every single tweet, on every single attack. And we asked her about that a little bit here in Iowa City after she wrapped up her speech. Take a listen.
But the question now is, are we going to follow him on every single racist insult and taunt that he tweets? Or are we going to take back this conversation? Some people had asked me, are you going to respond to this? Are you going to respond to that? And the answer is no. I'm going to talk about the big pieces that were broken. You know, things were broken long before Donald Trump got here.
And Anna, with the 2020 field growing by the day, this is going to be a question that every single one of the Democratic candidates will have to answer. How do they stay on message? How do they talk about their candidacies, their platforms, and then not allow President Trump to sort of set the agenda every day? But at the same time, how do they draw that contrast between their candidacies and President Trump, who they're trying to take on in the general election? And I can tell you, over the last couple of weeks, just talking to voters in the early states, voters, too, are divided on what they want to see from the Democrats. There are a lot of voters who say they want to see the fighter in some of their Democratic candidates, that they want them to take on President Trump directly. And then there are plenty of other people we have talked to who say they do not want them to engage President Trump at all. So that divide already very clear, even though it's just February, Anna.
All right, just February of 2019, mind you. MJ Lee.
That's right.
Thank you. With us now, CNN political commentators Ana Navarro and Simone Sanders. Simone was National Press Secretary last time around for Bernie Sanders' 2016 presidential campaign, and Ana has worked with a number of top Republicans, including Jeb Bush and John McCain. So let's discuss Warren first, Simone, because you heard the comments she made questioning whether President Trump will be a free man in 2020. Is this the fight fire with fire approach?
I think it's a little bit of that, but I also think we heard Senator Warren pontificating on what is absolutely true. I think there is a growing sentiment that you don't know what could happen. I don't know if we'll continue to see that refrain from her on the campaign trail. She could have been testing it out today, and depending on what all the coverage looks like, we might not hear it again.
The Trump campaign has put out a statement specifically about Warren's announcement. I don't think we've seen that on any other candidate's announcement days. And then the president also tweeting this weekend about her. He also is taking a swipe at Amy Klobuchar and her snowy campaign kickoff today. But for the most part, he's really not going after other candidates. Anna, why?
You know, and I saw the tweet about Amy Klobuchar and calling her a snow woman for standing there braving the snowfall, and it made me chuckle, frankly, and roll my eyes. I mean, this is a guy who skipped a visit to a U.S. cemetery in France of U.S. veterans because he, poor baby, was afraid to get his little hair wet. And so I think taking on Amy Klobuchar, attacking her for standing in the middle of a snowfall in her home state, might not be the hill he wants to die on, might not be the smartest line of attack for Trump. Look, I think he's been very careful of how he treats Kamala Harris. Amy Klobuchar, if calling her a snow woman is the best he's got, that's not much of a nickname from where he comes from. I think he goes after Elizabeth Warren more than others because there is something about Elizabeth Warren that triggers the Republicans, that triggers conservatives, that triggers the right wing. I would equate it a little bit so that my Democratic friends can understand the way that Ted Cruz triggers visceral emotion. Elizabeth Warren triggers visceral emotion.
Well, Warren's comments that we played is an example of how she's fighting back, and she's fought back along the way. Even in 2016, I remember when she got in the mix. But she's taking a different approach than some of these other candidates, at least what we're seeing so far. Here's Cory Booker.
Everybody's tough. I know there's a lot of great fighters there. But I've learned that when I come to being tough, I never want people to think that in order to be tough, you have to be mean. In order to be strong, you have to be cruel. I want to campaign like I want to govern. I'm going to get criticized, so let me get ahead of it. They're going to say, oh, gosh, more candidates talking about love and hope. Oh, my God, how are you going to beat Donald Trump with that?
So is this strategy of love and hope a winning message for Dems this time around?
I have to laugh a little bit. You know, I know Cory Booker personally, and what he's talking about, he really believes this, you know, and I think that this is a strategy that could, in fact, work for Cory. Look, he's saying that I can talk about love and hope, but that does not mean that I don't have a plan, that I don't have a policy platform. Now, the question just becomes, are there enough voters in particularly the key states that that's a message that they want to latch onto, that they're susceptible to? Like, is that something that gets folks fired up in Iowa, gets folks fired up in South Carolina? And those are two places that Senator Booker has been a number of times already, and he's drawing great crowds. People are coming out to hear what he has to say. Now, it's still early. It's very early, okay? The first Democratic primary debates are not until June. So I would just caution folks to wait and see. It's too early, in my opinion, to say whether or not love and hope is gonna win, you know, this Democratic nomination, but it could.
Anna, let's talk about lessons learned. Because as these Democratic candidates formulate their strategy, what should they take away, perhaps, from how Trump tore apart the 2016 GOP field?
Look, for me, lessons learned, I think Elizabeth Warren has taught one very early, which is do not allow yourself to be provoked, to be baited by Donald Trump. She allowed herself to be baited by Donald Trump on the Native American issue, and she's come out looking much worse on the other side for taking his bait and for going down the path that he led her down. So, you've got to somehow be able to answer him without him being the one that's pulling the puppet strings. He is very, very good at that. He's very good at branding. Little Marco, Lying Ted, Low Energy Jeb, Crooked Hillary. So, you've got to also be able to brand him. But I think if you look at 2018 and some of the Democrats that most captured the imagination of the Democratic base and of the country, they were optimistic. It was people like Beto O'Rourke, like Stacey Abrams, like Andrew Gillum. You have to be able to fight back, but at the same time, you have to be able to offer something positive that you stand for. Got to be able to walk and chew gum at the same time if taking on Trump.
Some of those people you just mentioned did not win their elections, but one woman who did, and she won big, was Amy Klobuchar. She announced her bid today from her home state of Minnesota. We know Trump won some of the Midwest and the Rust Belt states that Democrats thought were safe, Simone, while Hillary barely won Minnesota. Klobuchar won re-election there by more than 20 points. Given her strength and her appeal with Minnesotans, does that alone make her a serious contender?
Look, I think Amy Klobuchar is a serious contender. But again, we have to wait and see how folks stack up on the debate stage, and if we have the same, and if the voters have the same energy for Senator Gillibrand, Amy Klobuchar, Cory Booker, and Kamala Harris, for that matter, that they have now in July, August, September, and as we get into the fall of 2019. But look, I think I am so excited that there are a number of women who are not just running for president, but running for president as top contenders. I hope this is the new normal. Now, the question, I don't want folks to overplay, if you will, that just because somebody is from the Midwest, I'm from Nebraska, just because they're from the Midwest, they have the potential to connect with Midwest voters better. Because someone like Senator Gillibrand, for example, she is from New York, but she's from upstate New York. Troy and Albany look a lot like places in Iowa than I think people realize. And so it's really about your message. It's about your ability to connect with the voters. And again, what is your vision? Anna's absolutely right. Democratic voters don't want to hear that Donald Trump just sucks and that your opponent is bad, because we heard that in 2016, and as you'll note, a number of folks just frankly did not come out to vote on the Democratic side of the aisle. So we need bold visions, policies, platforms, and I think that's what we're seeing from these Democratic candidates thus far, and I'm very excited about the field.
Simone Sanders
and
Navarro.
I think another lesson learned, Anna and Simone, is there's some things in life, like elections, like presidential elections, that are binary choices. But for people like Jill Stein or Gary Johnson, Hillary Clinton might very well have been elected president. And so, Democrats need to keep, and everybody that wants Trump out needs to keep their eye on the ball. It is a binary choice.
Thank you, ladies. Good to have both of you with us this weekend. Thank you. All right, for the first time since initially addressing the scandal in Virginia, Governor Ralph Northam is speaking out about the controversy engulfing his state, not just him, not just his seat, but several others. Why he's saying he's not going anywhere. You're live in the CNN Newsroom.